Welcome everyone to today's webinar on winning in a candidate-centric market. Super excited to have everybody here and to talk about this topic here. So I'm excited for you all to join us and spend this hour with us. A couple quick housekeeping items really quick. As always, we are recording the session, so we will be distributing the recording after the call. And you know, everybody will be on mute during the discussion. But if you have any questions or have any comments or things that you would like to shout out, please use the Q&A function, and we also have the chat function as well. And then, just a quick intro on myself for those who don't know me. My name is Wendy Liu. I run product marketing at Sense, and super excited to have Jeff on the call with us.
Hey, everybody. Jeff Policio of Allied Insight. I've been in marketing I've been in staffing for about 10 years now at this point. So I'm happy to be on the call. I'm happy to be working with Sense in order to really talk about what I think is probably a pretty important topic this time of year.
Definitely. And just for those who are unfamiliar with Sense, Sense is an AI-driven talent engagement and automation platform. So we help recruiting organizations engage in really highly personalized conversations with their candidates at scale. And as the topic of this webinar suggests, we are living in a very talent-centric world in which companies that hire right and hire fast are more likely to succeed. And our all-in-one kind of talent engagement platforms help them do just that. We connect companies to candidates via chat, text, and email to all build trust and accelerate hiring and improve the overall hiring experience. And you might be wondering, why are two marketing folks, driving this conversation? And I think it's really interesting when you think about the parallels between recruiting and marketing. And the core functions are pretty similar in terms of identifying your audience, constructing effective messaging, and then understanding when's the right time to talk to the right people at the right, through the right channels. And what does that whole matrix look like? So super excited to just have this conversation and talk through how to win in today's candidate-centric market. I'll pass it over to Jeff to talk a little bit about Allied Insight.
Excellent, thanks. Allied Insight, we're a fractional CMO and growth marketing delivery that is built specifically for staffing. So with that, our methodology as we go about our process is to align with the executive team and what the corporate initiatives are. We provide a custom strategic vision that really does work within your ecosystem, your process, and your tech stack. We're methodical about our process and deliver in our execution. So we always like to make sure that we're doing things with purpose and acting in response to what we're trying to achieve and what we're all trying to work towards. We try to give a pretty fair amount of flexibility into being able to work when things change. Obviously, things like a changing landscape as in today, where you've got certain pressures from either a particular type of market or even certain technological needs. We try to become our trusted partner for the people that we work with in order to really be a part of their sort of executive team and being able to help give them advice, even to things beyond marketing that get involved in a little bit more of like the business element, as well as training and mentoring. Also really excited, obviously, to get this conversation underway. I think that, with all the conversations that have taken place over the last year, we've seen a very good sort of migration or progression of the conversation going from sort of digitization and automation. I know that lots of the webinar and information gathering that's been happening from last year and this year also really push on sort of experience management. And I think this is a great opportunity to talk about how the existing market conditions, being a candidate-centric or candidate-driven market, how that actually is impacting staffing agencies today and things that they could do in order to really navigate that landscape a little bit better. So just to kind of go through the agenda for today. So we're going to look at basically the market today, like how did we get here? We're going to talk about staging the perfect environment for your staffing agency. We're going to address removing friction from the funnel. educational resources that you can provide to your candidates. We're also going to discuss motivation with a high touch component, preparing for success. We're going to look at concierge onboarding services and also fostering advocacy, which I feel is probably something that is kind of forgotten in the grand scheme of things. We're really going to try to focus on making sure that we can apply this to each and every element of the hiring cycle and leave time for some Q&A at the end as well. So when it comes to the market today, I think it's important to understand like how we got here, right? It certainly wasn't something that was intentional, I don't believe, but it's certainly something that we need to be able to understand. So in today's market, you have influencers and you have impact. From an influencer perspective, like COVID-19 was a massive influencer. Like, I don't think anyone's going to doubt this, right? But what was the impact of COVID-19 was, mass unemployment. And then that stemmed into another influencer, which is long run unemployment, which yields yet another impact of career migration, geographic relocation, and even entrepreneurship, which completely changes the candidate pool as we see it today, or as we saw it previous to the pandemic. If we press a little bit further into the environment, you have personal consumer experience. So with stores closing, so brick and mortar was closed up, you couldn't get out to sort of experience or engage with the products and services that you were looking for. It created a new service system expectation within the consumer group, as well as it really put a greater emphasis on sort of this reviews economy that we're dealing with. So previous to, we have certainly had things like Yelp reviews and things of that nature that would influence our worlds. But I think that as a result of being pulled out of that personal or analog sort of infrastructure that we could participate in, it really puts a greater demand on the digital component. We have a sharp rise in job openings, which that ends up yielding multiple offers, so multiple offer negotiation. Prior to entering into the pandemic, we had a little bit more, I would say, of a client-centric recruitment process, or at the bare minimum, it was at least equal, which now in a candidate-centric environment creates a lack of responsiveness or even misaligned priorities, which can cause delays in the hiring sequence. And then in staffing, I think it's safe to say that we're all aware that there's still some antiquated processes that we're dealing with. And so as there is this greater demand from the candidate's perspective, based on all of their experiences they've had over the last couple of years specifically, it does put an increased demand on staffing agencies that might be relying on manual elements of their business or manual sort of processes in order to sort of navigate that landscape. So with all of this, we can see how candidates, found themselves in the driver's seat today. And it's important to understand this because the remainder of the presentation that we're about to go through is going to really lean on the fact that and understand how we got here. So from here on out, we're going to basically dig into, as I said before, each section of the hiring cycle and try to provide real actionable things that your staffing agency can do to maximize the outcome of your efforts in this candidate-centric market. Who doesn't love a good Yogi Bear quote, right? If you're familiar with Bearisms, I'm not even sure if that's a word. If you're unfamiliar with Bearisms or Yogi Berra, I would highly recommend that you do a Google search and you'll thank me later. Innocent, but true, right? If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up probably not where you intended, nor will your candidates, and nor will anyone else for that matter. Arriving at a destination takes planning. How much just depends on the complexity of the journey. All staffing firms are different and they're unique, and each of you have a different process. Some processes are simple and others are going to be a little bit more complex. While simple may be easier to tackle, complex doesn't mean bad. It just means that it requires more planning. In fact, an argument can be made that complex is actually good for the person who's engaging with your brand, provided that the journey has been planned out properly. So let's get into it. Staging the perfect environment. So as we mentioned, getting to the desired destination takes planning. And that said, having your candidates successfully complete your hiring process will also take planning. In the end, great experiences aren't accidental. So as we look at let's say something like mapping the candidate journey, and I know, right? You've all heard this hundreds of times before. But map your candidate journey, right? I suppose if everyone had already mapped their candidate journeys, it wouldn't appear on this webinar. So in this case, we're going to assume that there's maybe 3 people on this webinar who haven't done their homework yet. And so for you 3, map your candidate journeys. And I swear I'll take it off the future webinars that we do. But Wendy, mapping candidate journeys is really important, especially as you go through sort of like assessing how you're going to apply automation and automated tools. Can you kind of talk to some of these elements?
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, and I'm hoping that those 3 people get their homework in on time and get it done. But I think, mapping the candidate journey, I feel like so many people talk about it, but they don't actually talk about like what that actually entails and how to go about it. And I think you can look at it from like a linear perspective, like what are the different life cycles that your candidate is going through? Are they in a job right now? They're kind of passively looking, or are they hungry for like a new job right now? Are they desperately looking? Did they just apply? Are they now onboarded with your company? Have they just finished an assignment or a contract? Now are they looking on for their next one? I think it's important to know that it's not always linear either. It can be very cyclical, especially in that kind of passive to active looking stages. Sometimes you're like on fire, you really want to get a new job, like you're searching, and then life happens and you kind of fall into other stages, and it happens, and you kind of have to plan for that and understand where those different pitfalls can happen. But my kind of top, let's call it like 3 to 4 pieces of tactical feedback would be: 1, talk to your candidates. Like, do not operate within the 4 walls of your company. Talk to your recruiters, talk to people who you know and interact with, and just get their feedback. Talk to them about what's happening, like why are they looking, like what are some of the motivations behind going from stage to stage, and like talk about what the good things that happen in each of those stages and some things that they wish would happen. Really just make sure that you're operating and getting that feedback and really integrating it. Second piece is going through your own application. I know like the second piece here is anonymously testing, but honestly, I can talk with extreme confidence that some people have not reviewed their application process in longer times than they should have. Like, go through your application process and also think about is this the optimal application for that job type? Does it make sense for someone who is applying for like an hourly retail position to go through an hour's worth of applications? Like, maybe not. Like, test and really just think through everything, question everything, and then map your ideal journey. Like, what would be the best case scenario to get you from A to Z? Like, what are all the best things that can happen? And then as a data-driven company, test, learn, iterate on the process. Like, it's not supposed to be a one and done thing. It's supposed to be continuously evolving, because the world is evolving and different things are happening in the world, different things are happening in their lives. And you have to understand and know that there's some things that you can control, but there are some things that you won't know until you test it. So that would be kind of like my 4 quick things that I would do to really help kind of map that journey.
Yeah, listen, I couldn't agree more. The journeys are complicated, right? We talked about like the more complex the journey, the more planning actually has to go into play. And yeah, Wendy, absolutely, map it out to be your perfect outcome, and then look at all the areas that perfection doesn't occur. Look at all the plan Bs that exist. You've got a lot of pieces in here. You've got your application process, you've got secondary conversions, and you also have hiring cycle communications. Like, there's a lot of things that come together. Not mapping a candidate journey is a bad idea, right? You're guessing, you're doing a lot of gut checks, and there's a lot of guessing. To go to that second point that you made though, right? Test with anonymity, like a superhero, right? Cue that dramatic superhero music. So when people know that they're being monitored, they're going to be on their best behavior. And so you'll want to be careful to do this with like anonymous testing in order to not get false positives. So looking at your website connectivity to your ATS or your CRM, or your marketing automation or whatever else that you're using for your collection, look at those things and make sure that they're connected properly. Autoresponders, as a pro tip, you can customize a lot of your autoresponders. So many people have default autoresponder messaging in place. This is a really, really easy way that you can customize your communication to align with what it is that you do as a staffing agency, to expose bits about your process. So as someone is going through, the first portion of that engagement, give them some insight as to like what that looks like and what they can expect. And as they go through the second, provide them that insight to what the second piece is. Last, anything that extends value, you want to focus in order to sort of create the perfect environment, you want to focus in on those things that extend additional value. These are those secondary conversion points that I mentioned that we talked about in the initial mapping. These are the things that are your how-to instructions, your market reports, your trend analysis, what's it like to work with you, salary guides, whatever. They're basically any resources that you could provide in order to educate that candidate to make them smarter, faster, stronger, superhero, right? We want to make sure that we're sort of educating them along the way. So in removing friction from the funnel, it's important to know that there is both an internal and an external focus, and to understand, how these funnels apply to staffing. In staffing, there is obviously in that awareness piece, this is where candidates are first learning about your staffing firm. They're learning that you actually exist and you're on the map. This may be more challenging for some than others, but in this space, what you're trying to do is insert your staffing agency into their lives, so that way, wherever the candidate lives, you appear. And when they're thinking, I want a new job, your staffing agency is the thing that comes to mind. The next stage in this is consideration. And so this is after they've already learned that you exist, that you're a potential resource. They're likely reviewing you to see if you can help educate them in the process. And they're also looking at any open roles. That's right. Your open roles are just as important as the resource guides that you provide for education. How many of you treat them like this? Do you spend time standardizing that approach, creating uniformity in the posts, optimizing for keywords, and ensuring inclusive language? Those things are really, really important, because those are the things that you'll have lots of volume and lots of turnover. And also, those are the things that get you closest to conversion. And the conversion is obviously the point at which an application itself happens, or the filling out of a form to get a resource. This can seem basic or have some basic elements regarding form function. As Wendy had mentioned earlier, you don't want to require too great an investment to get a given payout. So make sure that your investment is weighted appropriately for what it is that they're getting. But it would be form functionality, thank you messaging, conversion notifications, and even lead routing workflows, which gets into sort of an internal process. But when you're looking at external friction, those things that I'm talking about are things like brand continuity, which is you've got multiple properties. You have your website, you have social media, you've got job boards, you have LinkedIn profiles, you have all these different spaces. Sometimes brands evolve. Sometimes they update and they refresh their logos, or they refresh their value propositions, or they come up with a new strategy or tactic. All of that is fine. But remember that people are seeing you at different touch points, at different inroads. And when they see you, they're getting a certain perception of your brand. If your brand is presenting one way in one space and then presents differently at your website, you now have a conflict which creates friction. It creates either curiosity or confusion, right? Messaging consistency, same thing, right? Your messaging needs to stay consistent as you go through. And I would also suggest, making sure that it sort of progresses what people understand to know about your process and your brand as they go. Application uniformity, rinse and repeat. Automation accuracy, again, your automation should align with where it is that touch point is occurring. And then process transparency. So when they're kind of going through these step-by-steps, whether it be something that's at the top of the funnel or the bottom, make sure that they're aware of sort of where they are and set those expectations accordingly. For the internal process, there is sort of the engagement and the advocacy. Wendy, did you want to talk about those?
Yeah, definitely. And engagement, obviously being an engagement platform, I have a lot to say about. But I think, one of the critical things that people, have to unpack with engagement is that there's literally so many different stages like that a candidate goes through, even within just this one, part of the funnel. You're talking about first collecting their application and sending them a notification, or getting them to, submit some documents or submit their certifications, or even doing interview scheduling, like how many emails need to go back and forth between a recruiter and a candidate to schedule a freaking interview. But there's a ton of just like different stages within all of this like engagement funnel stage. And what that also means is that there's a ton of opportunities for you to actually miss out on talking to them and engaging them. And there's a ton of areas where that communication can fail. So it's an incredible opportunity for you to really think through, and this comes back to the candidate journey, but really understanding what are the pieces that they need to understand, and what are the moments that you want to play in to make sure that your candidate feels supported, that they have that white glove experience. Because again, they are the people in the driver's seat at this time. And that's probably not going to change for a long time coming. And to be able to give them, basic things like getting them to provide additional transparency, right? Like, where's their application at? What's going on with their interviews? Just being able to fill in those gaps. There's a ton of opportunity within this stage of the funnel, and really important to get right, because I think it impacts the application experience really significantly. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, to sort of touch on that, there you also have multiple pivot points. So what it is that you're just saying right now, there is obviously the mechanical component where we need to introduce or continue to process things through for their application. But at the same time, just to what Wendy said, you're also communicating to them what the process is and adding transparency. You're communicating to the hiring manager simultaneously what's actually happening. And think about the manual processes that happen today when automation isn't in place. In order to just do those bits, how many touch points have to happen, and how much time it takes for basic follow-up to occur. And so, yeah, talking about like lead notifications and automation tasking, or even internal notifications, super, super important.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we talk a lot about at Sense as well when we talk to our customers about like how to get started, because it's a little bit overwhelming when you think about just how much you can do with automation. But even just like focusing on one, right? Picking one use case, picking one moment that you want to automate, like that adds up over time. So just being able to like add and improve your system just by that one engagement piece can make a world of a difference in the long term. Gotta switch my earphones really quick. Low battery on that one. Well, and then talking it through engagement when we get to advocacy, assuming that the person's been accepted, and they've started that onboarding process, how do you keep them? How do you retain them? How do you get them to continue to be with your company? Because you've invested so much time for your recruiters, energy, effort, money, really just acquiring this candidate. And the best thing that you can do to really make that impact on the bottom line of your business is to have them become advocates for your company, to really have them, reach new candidates through referrals, or reach, like all of those, becoming an advocate for your company, right? But that doesn't happen just because you gave them a job. It does not. It happens when you create moments and experiences and make them feel like you're an advocate for them as well. Just a personal story. I was actually rejected from this company. It happens a lot, I know, surprising, right? But when I was rejected from this company, they sent me such a thoughtful email about, what my shortages, what my shortcomings were. And even though I got rejected, I still became such an advocate for them because I felt supported, and because I felt like they really cared about my career progression, regardless of the fact that I wouldn't be continuing with them. And so that's like why advocacy is so important, because it also impacts your brand beyond just your employees, but like who's going to work for you, who's going to like want to like advocate for you, to refer you. And so I think being able to create those experiences is so important. So that's why we kind of called it out within this area as well.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, right? Advocacy doesn't happen accidentally. Again, neither does great experiences or anything else. So, does your staffing agency have programs, benefits, and communities that go above and beyond in order to stand out from the competition? Remember what we talked about in the beginning, right? We were talking about the consumer experience and how it molded people. Well, unfortunately, the Amazon, Uber, seamless, DoorDash, super convenient app life experience that's inserted all these reward mechanisms into our everyday life that we've sort of grown to appreciate, consciously or subconsciously, is now so more an expectation.
Yeah.
And so, to that end, even for the people that maybe you don't provide that job offer to, what are you doing to make sure that they still feel valued? Because they might be a good fit for something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
It may not be, it's not a job today, but are they a good fit for something tomorrow?
Yeah. And I think one part of that also is that those internal communications, they reach beyond just the candidates, right? Those workflows, they also apply to your recruiters, and they also apply to your clients. You can leverage this kind of automated workflow process to your clients to make sure that they feel like they're supported, to make sure that they feel like they're in the loop on what's going on with their their open positions, and to follow up with their recruiters as well to make sure that did they follow up with this person, just giving them reminders and being able to kind of remove that friction as well.
Absolutely. So when we talk about sort of like resource education, right, we're talking about, again, this extension of value. And so knowledge is power, knowing is half the battle, G.I. Joe, I don't know. Knowledge fuels candidate engagement. This might be too specific for an after school special, but it's still very true, right? An educated candidate will be more engaged, easier to process, and have shorter hiring cycles, and also be more satisfied with your process once you've outlined it. So let's sort of break down the funnel once again from awareness to advocacy and look at, what things you can include that would be additional resources that can help educate that candidate as they're kind of going through your process that would help, all those extra benefits I just said. So from the awareness piece, right? Again, remember, this is that very, very top of the funnel where they're just learning that you even exist. Those are good opportunities. I mean, obviously, we could talk about social and blogs, which those are important things. Like, I don't mean to sort of downplay that, but beyond the social media and the blogs and the job postings, the things that you might want to use in order to build better awareness and also create some additional digital trust in the very beginning would be things like betterment checklists or perhaps even some best practice guides, right? Give them some education, teach them something that sort of helps them to be a better candidate as they kind of go through the process. Second to that is going to be in that consideration phase. So, the consideration is where they're really starting to vet you out. They've already sort of engaged with a couple of things that you have, but now they're really starting to invest a little bit more in order to figure out like whether or not you're the right fit for them. So this is stuff that you'd provide, like how-to instructions, salary guides, or what's it like to work with your staffing agency. The nice thing with these two sections is that while they require automation, they're both pretty reactionary automation and instantaneous. There's not a lot of pivot points. They're pretty linear. They're pretty simple. So you have someone who interacts with your brand. They're going to request a bit of information. The need is to respond, acknowledge the fact that they requested it, provide them that resource, and trigger a notification internally. Not a very complex automation sequence to set up, but certainly one that is massively usable. Like, you're going to find that in basically all of the sequences that you initiate, and then they'll continue to grow from there. When it comes to conversion, now we're starting to get a little bit more complicated. So in this section, we're starting to talk about that application and document collection. Well, the complexity that comes in here isn't necessarily that the application is different from one thing to the next, but more so the people who are participating are very different from one to another. So it's being able to have a system or a tool that allows you to not only do that data collection, but also manipulate the data so that you can understand what the quality or what the value is of the data that's been supplied, and then provide different automated responses as a result of it. So this would require some logic in the workflow, right? So that way you can identify individuals who are qualified versus not qualified. Maybe you have different varying degrees of unqualified, and how you'd want to approach those. This is going to take some time, but if you actually dedicate the time to building out this portion of your automation and of the candidate journey, you're actually going to remove a lot of work from your front line, which is going to free them up. It'll free up your recruiters to spend more time with the piece that you really need that human interaction with, which is really building rapport, creating confidence, continuing to build trust with your brand, as well as prepare them to have a successful interview. From there, we can move into like engagement, which that's sort of your social interaction. It's a little bit more of those alumni programs that I was talking about. And then last, again, the job shouldn't end, or our roles shouldn't end with the placement. It should actually end with advocacy, where what you're doing is providing them such an environment at the end of their whole experience when they are the most satisfied with you. You're coming back in and you're providing them that additional wow factor that makes them want to brag about the experience that they just had with you. So going from there, now that we've sort of like deconstructed the whole funnel, we've talked about all the bits and pieces that you can include in there. We talked about where automation sequences can apply. I want to dig into one more piece, and that is high touch motivation. The reason why I want to talk about this is that I think often we tend to think as automated communication as intrusive or annoying. And I think that's because we typically assess this communication in a vacuum, assuming that everyone's inboxes are just empty except for our emails. I don't know about you all, but my inbox isn't empty. How many people on this call, how many of your inboxes are empty? And you can count the number of emails that came from Sense or from anyone else, from Allied Insight or from anyone, right? The other hang up that I believe happens is we also want to assume that the statements that we're delivering to them in that interaction, in that conversation, are ones that are simple, understood, and they get it. The problem is that we know they're simple and understood because we've already said them hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of times in some cases. This might be the first time or even the fifth time that they heard it. It may not resonate the same way. So high touch automation can really help to educate, but also motivate your candidate to stay engaged throughout the entire process. So looking at like your pre-application sort of phase, if you will, providing them high touch automated touch points can assist with sort of providing casual resources, extending additional explainer content that sort of that can, again, educate them on process. Perhaps you're doing live sessions for your candidates to educate and provide betterment. You might have learning tools or maybe even some self-led instruction. All of those things can actually be delivered through automated trigger points to, again, maintain that connection, maintain a high level of engagement, and improve the level of responsiveness that you get when you do need to do data collection, when you do need to find out if they're available for an interview, or if you do want to get feedback on how that interview went. During your interaction, you're looking more so at sort of like what's taking place in that conversation. So while obviously your recruiter is going to be interfacing with that candidate, this is where you would sort of look at your journey and your process and try to determine where can you include automation in order to help support the activities of your recruiter. So these might be thank you messages, next steps. Let's say for, like in Wendy's example, people who didn't qualify, maybe you provide them some similar roles or roles that are a little bit more aligned with what it is that they have as a background and experience. You can discuss your process. You could even get feedback loops. So anything that sort of that gets you in line with understanding what their experience was like. So this will also help to promote profile creation, building out references, resumes, certifications, getting all that stuff back in, preparing them for tasks, and even just giving status updates throughout the hiring cycle. The last side, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Jeff, I just wanted to ping in on a couple things during that during interaction phase. And, you know, as much as it hurts for me to hear anyone thinking of automation as, you know, removing anything badly to say about automation, I'm kidding. And the reality of things, like, automation is actually helping to reduce a lot of those redundant tasks so that your recruiters and that your team can actually focus on these high touch and high fidelity interactions and experiences, right? Like an example that I heard, like, while talking to one of my customers, is that after she introduced Sense and two-way text messaging and kind of that automated, you know, reminder of their first day being on Monday, like, no recruiter wants to spend an hour of their time on Sunday reminding their candidates that they have their first day tomorrow. Like, no recruiter wants to do that. And so it's kind of that mix of being able to have all the things that can be automated and have that kind of be taken care of, and making sure that candidates still have a method to interact and engage and get information that they need. But it also frees up so much more recruiter time so that they can develop these relationships, so that they can have those experiences that only you know, recruiters and candidates can have. Like, ultimately, no one's saying that recruiting is always is going to be completely automated in the future. It's still a very human-centric business and industry. I think understanding that is really pinnacle to understanding how automation plays within this space. And I think the feedback loops is also really critical. Like, being able to understand, even like during interaction, but also post-placement, was this a good fit? Are you happy in this role? And being able to catch that before it becomes bigger problems, before they kind of leave your company, is also a huge area that can prevent a lot of churn within your funnel. So.
No, absolutely. Agree 100%. You know, and then as we look at post-placement, you know, in this, it's a little bit more similar to your pre-application when it comes to the types of kind of reactionary response. The major difference in post-placement to pre-placement is expectation. And the expectations are massively different, because now this candidate has spent a lot of time with you. They've invested in you, and you've invested in them as well. Now it's going to come down to how accurate is your information? How clean did you keep your database? How accurate can you use those personalization tokens in order to keep them engaged in a post-placement sort of environment? So we're looking at more optimized communication that aligns with the specifics of that particular individual that you're trying to talk to. And we're also looking to add value to foster that longer term engagement, to generate testimonials and referrals, to look at even like creating preferred statuses, right? Like individuals that maybe you've redeployed a couple of times and you've been involved in their career path versus just placing them for one job. Alumni resources, referral rewards, even ambassador programs.
Yeah, and just one last thing on that post placement. I think something that's also really critical to understand in this kind of new market that we're living in is that people rarely want to stay within the same position twice. They are looking for career development. They are looking to get, whether it's higher pay or a different title or some kind of advancement. And so being able to take that into consideration as well during this post placement is also really critical. If I get one more email asking me to do a creative director role when I have nothing to do with, I can barely use Microsoft Paint, I'm going to get upset at the company. So I think, you know, just being able to provide that relevant content, especially in this post placement, is so critical, because they like you said, they expect so much more, and they expect you to know that they don't, like, you know, what their preferences are. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents there.
Agreed. So listen, Warren Buffett says it best here. The reality is that while planning can provide some immediate impact, there's really a much bigger picture to consider, right? So short-term planning typically doesn't yield long-term results or Yeah, I mean, let's just stick with that, right? Like it doesn't typically yield long-term results. And therefore, it really builds upon an already reactionary environment. So the goal here is to move your staffing agency from being reactive to proactive. And to start with what you want the future to look like, and then work backwards. Like it reminds me when I was a kid, I'd get like a maze, and like instead of starting at the start, sometimes you start at the finish. You know what I mean? Like you get to see like basically where you're headed. Sometimes it identifies those turnoff points a lot easier if you look from your finish point back down at what you have. So we're going to get into basically preparing for success, right? So here's where all the elements that we've been discussing up until this point, here's where they all start to stack up. So just like building a building, your foundation prepares you for the structure. And so we've discussed basically mapping the candidate journey and building out that structure and all those elements to support the candidate at different points within the process. Now let's really start stacking them together and discussing kind of like how they kind of come together and how they interact. So in starting again with the mapping of the candidate journey, I apologize, but again, the three of you, please make a note, do your homework. So from mapping that candidate journey, your very next task is to overlay your in-house process. That's going to give you the opportunity to understand whether or not your process actually fits with your ideal candidate journey. Identify the gaps, test anonymously, right? We're going to basically look to see where those pockets are, make adjustments as needed, but then test it. Everything that you've done up to this point would be, I would say, idealistic, right? On paper, looks great. In practice, may not work. So after you're done testing, then you're going to want to amend that process. You may want to amend your in-house, the actual in-house process. You may identify areas where automation can give you some assistance. You may identify some areas where you tried applying automation, but you realize that maybe the database isn't ready for you to apply that automation there, right? So go through and figure out where those breakpoints occur. Next, train everybody, right? This isn't just a recruiter thing or just a sales thing. This is an everybody thing. If you belong to that staffing agency, then you belong to the training thing. So leadership to understand what's happening. Your front office should know what's going on. Your middle office who's doing marketing should be able to help you and understand what's going on. And also your back office where you're doing your onboarding. Everybody needs to be understanding what information is getting collected. One of the things that you'll probably find in this too, by including more of your departments to participate in the build out and in this entire process, they're going to bring you some trouble or pain points that they have that you may be also able to remedy at the same time. Lastly, it's really important to monitor, interpret, and adjust, right? It's important for everyone to realize that this is a circle and not a finish line. Markets will shift, demand will change, expectations will evolve, and new technologies are going to emerge. It's the nature of the environment. Each of these situations are going to require your staffing agency to adapt and evolve with the changing landscape in order to maintain that competitive edge. So keeping this in a cyclical process, as Wendy mentioned earlier, is the thing that will keep you ahead of the curve and likely ahead of the competition.
Yeah, and I would just add, taking a look at your data and understanding really what are the KPIs that you want to measure against is really critical for this too. Like, do you have the data in place? Not only is your database clean enough for you to make it actionable, do you need to revive your database? Do you need to enrich it? Do you have to update it? But then also, like, are you looking at the right data pieces? Are you holding your recruiters against the right metrics? Like, what are those metrics? Why are you holding those metrics, holding them against those metrics? I think just understanding and taking a look at your reporting and your analytics to understand what are the key, processes or key practices that are making the biggest impact to your business. How do you optimize those? And what are the areas that are maybe lacking, or the things that, aren't working so well? And then how can you improve them, and how can you reimagine how you leverage that process, right? Like, if your whole goal is to keep your candidates informed about, new job openings, like, how are you doing that? And are they responding? Are they not responding? And again, just taking that kind of data-driven approach is like super important to make sure that you're continuously iterating and learning.
Agreed. Agreed. So that brings us into sort of the concierge onboarding experience. I mean, what does the word concierge make you feel, right? Assisted, waited on, catered to, in good hands, secure, right? Usually reminds me of like some trip that I might have taken and had a hotel concierge person help me with dinner reservations or what have you. Now think about your onboarding process, or even better yet, go through your onboarding process. How do you feel? Do you feel that that's a concierge service? Do you feel like that the word concierge would apply to the experience that you're creating? You know, in looking through trying to create sort of a white glove service, these are some simple ways that you can amend your existing process in order to increase transparency and add value in order to meet the expectations of today's candidates. So in this, you know, we're looking at basically, you know, status updates with your client and your candidates through automation, right? We talked about that earlier, being able to pivot it out. So when something occurs, instead of having to spend the time doing it, you can actually circulate that communication out as necessary. We're looking at internal notifications. So making sure that you're managing your workflows properly, making sure that you're using automation to support not only the initiatives that you want done, but also support the sort of the demands of the role as you've dictated based on your internal process. We're going to be looking to align your client onboarding in advance. Think about that as a concept. So right now, where everything was, like I said, a little bit more client-centric prior to the pandemic, and now we're very candidate-centric, an area that you can remove friction in the funnel, have the conversation with your clients up front. What does your onboarding process look like? Because our onboarding process looks like this. Let's see if we can make sure that they align so that way now we remove any sort of fallout or any bad feelings. Like, let's not trip with the finish line, right? Creating space for the candidate, optimizing that candidate onboarding portal is important. It gives them an opportunity to be able to see things visually. It also gives them a space to have as a repository so they could upload any of their information, their resume, their credentials, their referrals, which is very good for business as well. Maybe there's a dedicated onboarding personnel, right? Maybe you actually have like an onboarding liaison that's assigned to these people as they come through in order to answer some questions. Again, I'm not sure what your volume is. It'll depend on volume. It'll depend on what your resources are. Also, reporting for management and leadership, right? Internal pipeline visibility is really, really important. And just like Wendy had said, you know, if you don't have the right KPIs in place and you don't have the right resources to accurately count the things that you're trying to count, then the KPIs are worthless, right? So make sure that you're measuring the things that you can actually measure and make sure that those measurements are meaningful to your business. So we come to the end and we're going to talk about fostering advocacy. So in order to foster advocacy, you're basically trying to make remarkable experiences that are meaningful. And so this is sort of like your pro tip, boss level, power up kind of thing, right? Like we're at the boss level at this point. All too often, staffing firms tend to stop or feel that their jobs are done once the onboarding is complete. So once the person's in the position and, you know, we know that they're okay, they're happy enough, they're going to maintain that job for whatever that window is after the fact that we all know exists. You know, we're usually done with that process. And while that's a true thing, I think that happens in a lot of staffing agency, it's a huge missed opportunity. So some ways that you can impact that that candidate environment and in fact sort of create a little bit more of a space for advocacy or wanting people to celebrate you would be to do things like welcome packages, let's say. Now, I'll be honest, I've done them. It's a bit of a lift, but it is a great experience. People love getting stuff, right? So to be able to do some sort of a welcome package that arrives on the first day that congratulates them and celebrates them. I know it's a little tricky because hybrid sort of office times and such, so maybe it's not as applicable, but maybe there's some other way that you could welcome them. First day introductions. Again, I know that we're in a post-pandemic world. We have like sort of a hybrid office structure. So maybe an on-site visit isn't the most easy to accomplish, but perhaps a virtual one. You could do check-ins on day 1, 7, 30, 90, 180, add any number you like in there, 12, 23, whatever numbers you want to do, offer some check-ins, get that feedback loop done, find out how things are going, make sure that you can get in front of the problem before it's too late, right? We're moving from reactive to proactive. Alumni programs, they offer exclusivity, they offer resources, they offer network. You have things like premier candidate status programs. That's where we were talking about before, right? The person that has been with you on their career journey, right? We don't want to obviously take from one client and give to another because that creates other complications. But look, if I'm coming to you and I say, hey, I want to be able to move my career needle in this direction over the course of the next 6 years, can you help me? Well, I'm a multiple conversion point. So if I'm bringing you the request, it's not you that's pulling me from that company. I'm bringing you the request. I now create multiple commissions for you on that. Lastly, ambassador programs, those are all areas where we can obviously create a space where people can feel wonderful about their experience and feel like something that they want to celebrate just happened to them. So, do we create that space for them to want to celebrate?
And one that's a very quick one, but makes a big difference for a lot of the people that we've seen are happy birthday messages. Like as easy as just sending a happy birthday. And that's like so easy to just automate, right? You just pull in their birthday, you send out like a little birthday message. It may feel corny, it may feel automated, but it still feels like, hey, like this person took the time to make sure that I, got a birthday message. I think that's such a quick and easy, just moment of delight. And when it comes to ambassador opportunities as well, something as simple, like really leveraging social and creating your own hashtag for your company and celebrating, when they get hired or when their first job is like, it's just those small little moments that might not even cost anything for your company, but it just takes like a little bit of effort and that just makes a world of a difference for the person on the receiving end. So would highly recommend.
Agreed. Nice. So look, I think this is like a record, right? Like, first of all, it brings us to the end of the webinar. We do have time for Q&A, which is phenomenal. We didn't run over, so like super happy about that. First foremost, want to thank everybody. Want to thank Sense for letting us do this, obviously, like for allowing us to sort of come in and talk about this very real situation that's happening right now. And also everybody for attending. Like, it's great. I always come from the standpoint that I want to bring really good information to people that will help sort of move the needle in the industry. And so hopefully, there were gems in here that you found that you can actually take back actionably today and over the course of the next, this quarter as you're planning for 2022 in order to make 2022 an even better year. So thank you for that.
And thank you, Jeff, for being on the call with us. Obviously, as a fellow marketer, I always appreciate just kind of like this kind of thinking. And I think it's never been more important to kind of share the practices of really understanding who your audience is and being able to kind of map that. It's never been more important to have that in the recruiting and in the staffing space. And I think that we do have a poll coming up shortly, I think. So
Sure.
we'll launch a poll in the next couple of seconds here if you want more information, either from Sense or from Allied Insight, but we will take some time to answer some questions too. So Jeff, there's a question here that says, can you talk to remote and employee engagement software like Recognize? Would you consider these ambassador programs, or are there kind of ambassador programs that you would recommend?
So great question. So I'm not familiar with Carrot, but I am going to look it up now. But look, it is a challenge, right? Like when you have remote employees, it's really hard to maintain engagement. I would say that there's a lot of things that you could do within your chat areas. So when you have things like Slack, Teams, etc., like a lot of those do offer some means of being able to interact and engage with your candidates. Anything that sort of provides them a space, it could be something even as simple as like a LinkedIn group. anything that sort of provides an individual space to be able to participate and interact a little bit more with your brand would be a way that you can, leverage that sort of ambassador type of environment. But I'll definitely look into Carrot, and whoever it is that supplied that question, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, like Jeff mentioned, even if you're not using very ambassador specific programs, just those quick and easy ones are like the free ones on even Reddit. Creating a thread on Reddit, like those are just quick and easy ways to just kind of create an ambassador type of feel and community for your candidates and for people who are working with you. There's another question here, and I'm actually not sure exactly how to answer this as well. So, Jeff, I'll
Sure.
lean on you. But in markets with many applicants that speak other languages, what is the best way to automate interactions with them? Our English automated messages just come across as impersonal and confusing to them. And the last thing we want to do is ostracize our candidates. And just for that person who sent in that question, I 100% applaud you. I know from like just speaking, from my own personal experiences, like knowing that I have family that can't speak English and they're like the hardest workers I know. It is so important to just have that lens. So I applaud you for having that lens, for really wanting to cater to that audience as well. And I know that Sense is also working on this in other streams, but Jeff, any recommendations from your end?
So there's nothing beats domestic. It is a bit of a challenge. I would recommend that, look, if you've placed someone, so I don't know if this has to do with like global talent placement, where you have people who are speaking another language or what have you, it might be a great way. So sort of ambassador program 2.0, right, is where you can actually get them to maybe do tasking for you. So if you had someone that you placed who does speak the other language, who does really love your brand, who's really super engaged, who would be a good community manager, I would recommend getting some of those people in place. If you don't have that from a situation where you've placed that talent, I'd probably be looking at like on-demand type talent. So again, you'd be trying to like augment your team with some online resources. You've got things like, there used to be a lot of them, but Upwork bought so many of them at this point, but like Upwork, right? Like you can source like talent in a variety of different countries, that if you wanted someone that can be able to handle some messaging, you might have a little bit of a curve in sort of training them, but you could certainly leverage them up and probably get some, at least that domestic communication and have it resonate properly. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, awesome. And Ashley is throwing me a curveball here, not really, but it is a very important question of how would you suggest integrating the idea of psychological safety during the recruitment process to bring out the best from candidates during assessment? Super amazing question, and something that I am actually very, very passionate about when it comes to psychological safety. I think I love that the conversation is happening more and more, because culture is becoming increasingly more important and actually defined as a key performance indicator for businesses to succeed. I think one of the ways, and we kind of talked about this earlier, is providing that content up front and being able to provide those resources. I think a lot of people, especially during that assessment phase, feel like every answer that they are providing is like hyper analyzed, and giving them understanding of like how their information is going to be used, giving them kind of insight into like the things that they're looking for, just so that they understand where you're coming from and understanding like what kinds of things that they're looking for. I think that it all comes down to giving them that information and preparing them in advance. So that's kind of the ways that I would think about it, and just creating and just understanding as well, like what are some of their concerns, and being able to unpack that. So that would be kind of like my suggestions there.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, we are just at the top of the hour, so I want to thank everyone for staying on and for asking these really insightful questions. And thank you to Jeff also for just being on this webinar with us and providing such a wealth of information. And I know that we have some upcoming additional webinars that we'll be putting on as well. So for everybody else, stay tuned. And thank you again for spending the hour with us.
Thanks so much.